Of CPAC 2022. I'm Millie Weaver, and we're here with a man here who is running for Congress in Nevada, Las Vegas, Nevada, a patriot. Go ahead and tell people who you are, about yourself, and what you're running on.
Thanks very much, Millie. Great to be here with you. Yeah, so I'm Noah Malgeri, running for U.S. Congress in Nevada's 3rd District. I'm an America First patriot, conservative. The thing that got me into the race is the threat that I've seen our country's foundational individual liberties come under has been shocking to me as a father, a business owner, and as a citizen, and as a veteran. Really looking at and the thing that shocks me, Millie, even more than the coordinated, systematic deterioration and stripping of our individual civil liberties is how unengaged and uninterested, disinterested, and just not really awake people are. The regular citizenry, most folks are totally asleep to it, or just indifferent, don't even care. And that's terrifying to me, because we could actually put a stop to this if everyone just got engaged just to like 15% more than they are today, or 20% more than they are today. This could be over in a week, but people are indifferent, and that's terrifying to me.
Absolutely. We definitely need more people becoming politically active, going out, helping real patriots get elected. Now, what are some of the main policies that you are running on in your campaign?
So probably the biggest overarching policy that distinguishes me in my campaign, coming from a military background as a former Army officer and an Army plans officer, I see the threat from the CCP to be the biggest threat that the United States is facing. When I say the United States, I mean the people of the United States, which is the country. I believe that the illegitimate regime in D.C. right now, in the executive branch, is the CCP is not necessarily an adversarial relationship with them, because I believe that they're facilitating a lot of the work that the CCP is doing against the American people to gain an advantage, to degrade us and deteriorate us militarily, socially, culturally, and economically.
Right. I mean, there's definitely a problem with communism and socialism becoming more and more popular in America, especially amongst the young people. And I can't help but believe that that's because of the school system starting to indoctrinate young people with more progressive ideologies, and how that kind of bleeds over into some of the communist ideologies as well. What do you plan to do about education? A lot of parents are very concerned about critical race theory being taught in the schools, gender identity studies being taught in the schools. Do you have any policies or plans to help protect our children?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So I would abolish the Department of Education at the federal level. All of this critical race theory, this progressive, we call it progressive. It's actually radical Marxist indoctrination. But all of this would go away if parents would be able to take control back of their children's education. The teachers' unions now are explicitly saying, hey, look, we own your kids. We own their education. We position ourselves between you and your children, and we're an intermediary, and we filter what information you as a parents get to know about your children's decisions, their choices, whether they want to transition gender, get a COVID shot, get an abortion. We'll be the arbiters of what you need to know. We'll take care of not teaching your children how to think, but literally teaching them what to think.
Right.
And if we could just return education to the parents, I mean, government schools, so school choice is really fundamentally part of it, getting rid of the Department of Education. And then another side of it too is we have to make sure that when parents do dare to get engaged in their children's education and take an affirmative posture with regard to the school board and saying, look, I don't want my 8-year-old daughter to be taught about a radical transgender ideology or critical racism theory, then we can't permit the Department of Justice and the FBI to weaponize federal resources against these concerned parents. This is absolutely absurd to characterize people who are expressing dissent, criticism of the government, distrust of the government as disloyal, and beyond that, even as insurrectionists or domestic terrorists. Regular parents who dare to have the audacity to try to care about what their kids are actually learning with their own tax dollars. So we have to pull that back. We have to find out who's responsible for that and hold them accountable, because that's absolutely outrageous. We have to get rid of the Department of Education, and we have to make sure we can encourage school choice by any means necessary. The other thing too, Millie, I don't understand for the life of me. I'm an attorney, okay? I don't understand how universities and colleges in this country enjoy 501c3 tax-exempt status when they're openly partisan. It's disqualifying under the Internal Revenue Code. They should not be able to enjoy tax-exempt status, which they depend on to exist. So they're disqualified. They should not. They're not tax-exempt organizations. They're partisan organizations. They should not be. We need to review their tax-exempt status, and if necessary, revoke that.
Now, are there any provisions or laws that would revoke public education from being able to get funding if they're not also being neutral?
Yeah, and that's exactly one way to do it. I mean, you can either you can tie funding to neutrality, which we ought to do, or another way to look at it is withhold funding to the extent that there's partisanship.
Right.
Or I would prefer just to take federal funding out of education entirely. We should not be using federal tax dollars for education because there's always going to be that susceptibility for the next administration or whatever to do the same thing in reverse.
Right.
You know what I mean? And really should just go back to local.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how the federal funding issues were kind of key in why a lot of school boards actually enforced the max mandates on students. It's because they were afraid of having federal funding pulled from their schools. So if they were to rely more heavily on state funding, then that wouldn't be the issue necessarily now. But the other hand would be if they were to switch that, would that increase the taxes, like state taxes per se, on Americans?
Well, I don't know what the states, how they would respond. What I do know is in my jurisdiction, the state of Nevada, no matter how much more money we invest at the state level in education, somehow it seems to be absorbed with no manifestation of results. So we're still like 49th out of 50th in education in the country, okay? We just poured a whole bunch more money into the education system through the cannabis industry. That was one of the quid pro quos for legalization and taxing that industry. Tremendous amount of money. It translated into nothing. No results, no tangible results. We didn't even get up to like 23 or 17 or even 35. We're at 49. So I think the teachers unions and the whole that's why school choice, it's so, my point is it's extremely inefficient. So when you say will it increase taxes, I believe that the educational industry, which is what it is, will absorb as much money as you'll throw at them, and it doesn't really translate into results despite what they tell you. The only way to address this, it's worse than the federal government in terms of inefficient bureaucracy and graft and corruption. And what I think we need to do is introduce school choice and introduce competition. That, by the way, studies have shown when you introduce school choice and increase competition, performance goes up at the public schools because they're responding to the competition.
Right.
So we've got to get to school choice. I think it's a huge civil rights issue.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that having some kind of like a voucher system where kids can take that funding with them and have the school choice, that way parents are not locked into specific neighborhoods. Even if you're poor, you could try to get your child into a better school, better education system. Especially how, some schools in certain areas have bad ratings and they're not good, and you'd like to get your child into a school of your choice, or Christian private schools and things like that could get more funding that they would need to better grow and expand. So yes, I think that's a wonderful idea. Now, here's the other key issue that's really important as an American to many of the listeners here today is the Second Amendment. What is your stance on the Second Amendment? Do you fully support the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I carry all the time in Nevada, in my home state. I think we need national reciprocity, where your license to carry should be recognized, full faith and credit by all the states. I mean, for example, my marriage license, when I go outside Nevada to Arizona or California or here, like my wife and I are still married. I mean, your license, we need to have national reciprocity as a start. Then again, that'll introduce competition. But you shouldn't lose your rights to carry under the Second Amendment according to how your state has enacted them when you travel outside the boundaries there.
What's your stance on red flag laws?
Red flag laws are really a pretty new development, which is, I think, intentionally been implemented as a pretext in order to abuse it, to actually use it against people whom either the government or the state finds inconvenient, and not for necessarily for public. There's too much room or susceptibility for abuse. So I think what we need to, and that's not really it's not necessarily a federal issue, but generally speaking, red flag laws to me are too susceptible to abuse. The standards that I've seen to invoke a red flag law are so low, and then you don't get the due process, you don't get the hearing, and you could lose your fundamental liberties, just like we saw during COVID. I mean, when you have a constitutional right to assemble, worship, freedom of expression, carry a firearm, just because there is a virus floating around, that doesn't erase your constitutional rights. And the red flag laws is kind of similar. It's like a mini emergency anytime they invoke it.
Okay, so speaking of the COVID vaccines and mandates, what's your stance on vaccine mandates? What would you do to try to address some of the issues where we're seeing American citizens being forced choosing between a job and putting food on their table and feeding their kids, and getting an experimental vaccine put into their body?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with your the premise of your question. So I don't even call it a vaccine. I mean, it's some kind of experimental gene therapy that hasn't been tested long term. It's obviously, there's something other than public health considerations or science behind this completely irrational push to get every man, woman, and child, and now children and babies vaccinated with this experimental untested therapy. I think there's got to be something else behind it. I mean, either you can say it's profit motive, you could say it's something more nefarious, but then if the mandates absolutely have to go. They're divisive, they're destructive, they're unnecessary, they're not backed by science, not backed by public health policy. And the way to do it, Millie, and this is my proposal in Congress, okay? We can fight the mandates at the state, federal, and municipal level, and that's a lot of resources and a lot of work and a lot of time. We can fight those, but we're still left with the private mandates. I mean, you can't take it away.
Right.
So what my proposal is, as somebody who's practiced law for a while, the quickest way to get rid of the mandates is just simply remove the liability protection from the pharma companies for adverse effects from the vaccine. Because I'll tell you what's going to happen if you do that. They won't stand behind this product. There's too many adverse effects. They won't expose themselves to that liability. And what that means is you won't be able to mandate the vaccines because the vaccine won't be available. They'll pull the product from the shelf. It's neither particularly effective, if it's effective at all, and it's certainly not safe enough for the mandates. But the quickest way to get rid of mandates is, this is the only product I've ever seen, Millie, in my entire life, where the government funds the R&D and the development of this experimental product, then mandates the population to take it, and then protects the companies who manufactured it from liability or suit. It's a racket. Millie.
It's so sick. It's
so
wrong.
Sick. It's totally sick.
People can die. There's children that have died from it, and what can they do? Because there's the vaccine companies have immunities.
Yeah, it's complete BS. So just treat it like any other pharmaceutical drug. You take your cholesterol drug or some other drug, all these like Lipitor, whatever you want to say, right? Any drug, you can sue if there's a problem. It's only the special class of, which is why they pretend it's a vaccine, which obviously it's not a vaccine, doesn't stop transmission or even contracting an illness, but they call it a vaccine because they want it to be characterized and treated like a vaccine and enjoy this protection. This is actually why they're pushing so hard to get children approved, licensed under the FDA, because under the 1986 Vaccine Act, in order to get licensed and get under that act instead of the emergency use authorization, they have to have it approved for all age groups, including children. So that's why this push to get it approved for children. It has nothing to do with public health. It has nothing to do with children being at risk. It literally only has to do with getting them to the point where they can continue liability protection. We have to make sure, and you know all this, Millie, but with the EUA, you can't have any feasible treatments. There are alternatives, which is why they suppress like therapeutics, because if you have an alternative therapeutic, you're not eligible for an emergency use authorization. The other thing too, I mean, you could sue these folks now, as far as I know, just based on the fact that the legal immunity and liability protection doesn't apply for acts that are intentional or maybe even grossly negligent. The information that's out there pointing to the lack of sufficient safety signals for these vaccines, these shots, at this point, you could impute willfulness to it. I mean, for these injuries now, to keep mandating and giving it to people, I don't think they enjoy liability protection anymore, because it's not negligence anymore. It's beyond negligence. And then the other thing too, I don't think this product meets good manufacturing practices under the FDA regulations. I think it's an adulterated product, because the variation and adverse effects that are manifesting are very widely, like 3 orders of magnitude across batches and lots. And the only way you could have that is if they're not consistent, which means they're an adulterated product. They shouldn't enjoy liability protection anyway.
Exactly. I mean, you brought up some really good points there, and it sounds like you're wanting more investigations into the vaccine and how people have been being injured in VAERS and all of that.
Well, that is an amazing question. I'll tell you, I don't want any. I don't trust any government investigation. Okay, I will not at this point trust any congressional investigation, administrative agency investigation. The only investigation that I want. This is the beauty. If you remove the liability protection, there'll be no federal mandates. There'll be no state mandates, municipal mandates. There'll be no private mandates because there'll be no product. And there'll be thousands of lawsuits across the country by thousands of plaintiffs' attorneys, which are a force of nature in this country, that will be doing discovery in court to find out, to assign liability. And all this will come out in court. Let's crowdsource this investigation to 10,000 plaintiffs' attorneys across the country. Let them hit all these companies with discovery, all these federal agencies with discovery, and try to figure out what's going on.
Right. I mean, that would probably be a more thorough, honest investigation than anything we would get from the government.
Right.
Well, tell people more about yourself. Where can they find you? How can they support your campaign?
Thanks very much. So, yeah, you can support me at noahfornevada.com. Find out more about me on all social media. I've done a lot of videos and interviews and op-eds, and you can find out my takes on military, some of the military developments, Afghanistan, many others. I was the only veteran in this race, but I encourage folks to support our campaign as an America First conservative, the only one in the race, and it's noahfornevada.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Noah. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, thank you. All right, guys. So we might have a couple more interviews here today, but really and truly, today is the last day of CPAC 2022. We have a couple more speakers, and then that is it. We're closing out. I've already seen some of the other media tents kind of closing up shop here, but we're kind of still going strong. I just want to remember and remind everyone to be grateful and thank our supporters. We had a lot of supporters and donors that helped make this possible to get this QUX booth up and going. So thank you to those supporters and those of you guys in the Tory Says group as well. I know you guys helped contribute a lot to this, so thank you. And remember, guys, this is about QUX TV. We're a real tech solution. We are fighting back against big tech censorship. I mean, we're in a day and age where these big tech companies are even censoring and banning politicians, banning up-and-coming candidates. I've known a couple different candidates, even Laura Loomer. She was running in her candidacy, and she was banned. So we really need to have platforms where we can get information out that's not censored, and also have privacy and security so our data isn't being mined, we're not being spied on, we're not letting the government, the CIA, track our every move, because at the end of the day, we're Americans. We have that right to have privacy, and we have that right to have free speech. So go to QUX.tv today to get your QUX TV box. You can order them now. Help support real tech solutions so that we can fight back against big tech. If we don't do it, who's going to do it? Thank you guys again.